We are back with Mr. Enrico Woolford. Enrico, welcome to CWSASITIS again, and thank you for joining us. What brings you to the United States, my brother?
Well, what brought me to the United States initially was drug trafficking as usual. I like to cover those cases because I think there is a nexus between what is happening in the Caribbean and in parts of Latin America with regard to development and with regard to the state of security in that part of the world. And the son of the president of Suriname was charged with drug trafficking, bringing 10 kilos out of Suriname into Trinidad and Tobago for transshipment to New York via Miami. And he was also charged with terrorist links and, of course, carrying a firearm and trying to sell firearms. He was being sentenced on Tuesday last. He got 16 years in prison, which is quite a light sentence, because if it were just for the narcotics alone, he would get about 10 years at the minimum.
Right.
So with all the terrorism and the arms smuggling and what have you, he got off pretty lightly. And that's what brought me here. What has kept me here is the political situation in Guyana. The president of Guyana, President Ramata, was here over the weekend. He didn't make any public appearance, really. And then I understand that the opposition leader and the leader of now the coalition, David Granger, will be here on Friday. So one of the things that we'll be doing I'll be doing as Capital News here would be to cover some of those events, and we've already covered the drug trafficking and...
So you plan to stay?
Yes, for
That's
the time
good.
being.
That's good. That's very good. One of the things I mentioned to Jerry Gavai and the other, and James Anthony Bond, is the chatter about, the media chatter about a recent murder of Courtney Crumb Ewing. When did Capital News learn about this, and when did you personally learn about this?
Well, first let me say it is horrible, horrible, horrible thing to have happened to a very vibrant, vigilant, and determined young man. Courtney Crumb Ewing came into our office several times with regard to the one-man protest that he was leading. He was very vociferous in his condemnation of what was happening in the country, what the Attorney General had done with regard to Kaito News and freedom of expression and what have you. And to think that he would die as a result of freedom of expression. Here, you know, we like to think that freedom of expression is what I am doing. The ability to get on the air via the internet or via a radio station or a television station or write into a newspaper. But the freedom of expression and freedom of assembly also belong to every single citizen. So that citizen is free to express his view at the road corner, free to protest at the road corner, free to assemble at the road corner. And that is what Crumb Ewing was doing. Capital News learned of it just as it was happening about within the hour. We were still around 7:30 that evening. Unfortunately, I was in New York, and by the time I got the information, it was quite late in the evening. But to my mind, this was a dastardly act. And for one to say that there are no political connotations with regard to it, as I heard Jerry Gavai making mention of it because nobody has investigated it. Are we going to wait 34 years, as is happening in this charade with regard to Walter Rodney's death, to figure out whether or not this has any political consequences? Of course. Anybody who is shot dead with a bullhorn and placards has to raise some kind of concern. He wasn't robbed. Nobody sought to take away anything from him. Even the megaphone they didn't take away. So it wasn't the case of that. If you're now trying to put issues of fraud and what have you that he may have committed in some other island, it makes the state of Guyana security even more dangerous. that persons could enter the state of Guyana with impunity, shoot someone in a housing area, and then leave the state of Guyana without the police even knowing what has happened. Something is definitely wrong in the state of Guyana if we continue that
I
way.
asked this question earlier of James Anthony Bond. I asked him who or what would have pulled the trigger. A, was it because Crummy Wing was a black man? Was it because he was protesting in front of the AG chambers? Was it because he was urging other people to vote for the coalition? Which one of those you believe, and maybe there might be more, would have pulled the trigger?
Well, let us go on the process of elimination. Let us just go on the process of elimination. My personal belief is that whether his toenails were big or small, or his eyes were big or small, or the color of his skin was blue or green or pink, those things do not matter. My position is that it has to do with the fact that he was freely expressing his view. Even if you claim that it was a noise nuisance, even if you claim this man with placards and a bullhorn was making noise in a community, there are other ways to deal with it than going out there and gunning him down. It cannot be that one should wait on the police to come up with evidence of a direct connection. And you know, several times, people who start fires, arsonists, are the first ones to stand there and help with the hose. So the fact that persons are trying to defend a position, that causes me to think again. Well, wait until the evidence comes. We live in a country, whereas my mother used to say, we talk one for Paris, two for night. One time we say one thing, and the other time we say another thing. You know, we're a classic case of the Dutch Acts. So what we need to do is to have this matter investigated indeed. But you must begin with some kind of hypothesis, some kind of premise from which you shall move. If that premise is that he was killed because he was urging people to go out and vote, he was a political activist, then let us start. There must be a starting position. But to start from nowhere, ex nihilo nihil fit. If you start from nothing, you will end up with nothing. And think about it. We've had Monica Reese. We've had several unsolved crimes going way back. So big jump, song and dance, and we jump up and down. And we have spent an enormous amount of money for cameras. I have not seen a single piece of video, well, that is worth its salt from all of those so-called security cameras, because everybody knows who are dealing with cameras. You can't have good cameras unless you have good light.
You know, this begs the question, in an atmosphere of violence and random killings and so on, why does this particular death, this particular murder, echo so much throughout the Guyanese community? Why?
Selwyn, it's simple. Because of what he was doing. Randy Persaud was killed that same day. Randy was a shopkeeper. Randy had just come back from Suriname. I think it's Randy Persaud his name was. That killing did not reverberate and resonate in the Guyanese milieu as the killing of Crummy Wing. Another guy was shot dead recently. Why? Because there is the assumption, there is the feeling that there are forces of darkness, there are forces of evil within the society that seek to ensure that those forces remain as the forces in the society. We've had the Phantom Squad killing people extrajudicially for years. and it is something that people seem to accept. Oh, this one just got killed. You know, it should not
It
be
became the
done.
norm. Right.
It should not be done. You know, and you're only power hungry if you haven't tasted food for days. You're only hungry if you haven't tasted food. But if you're at the table eating all the food, and the food is the power, and you continue to eat, then you're glutton. So there's power hungry, and there is power glutton, and there are those who are licorice. And one has to ask oneself, whom does this killing benefit? The power hungry or them that licorice?
If you had the ear, I asked Jerry this question, of the president of Guyana and the minister of Home Affairs, what would you be telling them?
Set the security system right in this country. We need to know that persons could walk the street without fear, without thinking that somebody is going to grab at them, without thinking that they will end up dead, without having to grill up their doors and their windows. Set the security system right. One cannot say, as Jerry just said, oh, in Toronto you have Jane and Finch. I guess he's going to say in New York you have you have some parts of Brooklyn and some parts of the Bronx and some parts of Manhattan. In Guyana you have some parts of Guyana that are unsafe. The society ought to be safe. The purpose of politics is so that you can acquire power, so that you can govern the society. It is man who has put government into place, put the laws and so on, and they're based on natural laws of what we see in nature, what some of us who believe in God believe that God has given to us. But at the same time, those are the inalienable rights of all people. And one of the inalienable rights of all people is to live free from fear. And you can't walk around the society where you're fearful that somebody is going to get into your pocket, somebody is going to snuff your life out, somebody is going to be lawless and ridiculous on the road, and you will end up dead or maimed or disabled for life.
In your personal opinion, why do you think this young man was driven or moved to stand alone? There are some who are saying they worked behind the scenes and they supported him here and supported him there. But literally speaking, visibly speaking, he stood alone. Why do you think, what did he know or what was going through him, from your estimation or speculation, that he would have felt comfortable or felt it was necessary for him to stand alone?
He was standing alone because, like Christ, he didn't have bread to feed the 5,000. When Christ was at the giving the Beatitudes, and when the people got hungry, he was able to gather fish and bread and share it around. When he's at the cross, how many people he had?
Sure.
How many people he had? When you're at the cross, you end up with your mother, a girlfriend, or an ex, one disciple, and the others stand afar off, hoping that they don't come for me. And in the Guyanese society, it tells you that there's a fear. If it's either people don't got time because they ain't getting fed, which means they're hustling for food, or there is this fear that I better not do or say anything because I ain't want to lose this little work. I agree with the man, but I ain't want to lose. Crummy Wing stood just about half a block from my office every day. I even told him that, like the men that Gideon sought, he ought to keep a watchful eye as an officer, as a former
You told him this?
GDF. You can't go kneel down and drink the water You have to look around as you lap the water up when he came to complain that somebody has taken away his placard while he went to use the bathroom or went into his bus. He ought to have been agreed about his own safety. Everybody ought to.
Yes.
You're not going to be silly not because the society is safe and walk in the middle of the road. You're not going to be silly and see somebody who's threatening and not deal with the threat. But at the same time, it should be a society where if you want to protest, you want to voice your opinion, you should have that freedom as enshrined by the Constitution, and to do it, as I said, free from the fear that you will be intimidated, or worse yet, you'll be killed for it.
What do you tell young people, a group of young people today who are angry by this and want to retaliate, want to react, in a vengeful way? What do you personally tell them?
I will tell them that you don't always fight fire with fire. You look at the great movements in societies in Guyana and around the world, and men who led from the front, men who lost their lives, including Martin Luther King, including Walter Rodney, men who got imprisoned like Nelson Mandela, men who were ridiculed like Gandhi. You look at the societies and you see that you do not always retaliate in like manner. You learn that there are more ways of killing a cat than choking her with cream. You learn to deal with issues, and you deal with that issue, and we ought to deal with the issue of crime in a responsible manner, in a manner that will tell the authorities and tell the society that we no longer want this. We want to see a society that has the capacity to do well. And therefore, it behoves everyone to go on May 11th and to make a decision in the best interests of the society of Guyana. Because that tells you how governance shall proceed for the next 5 years.
May 11th elections, Enrico. You're a businessman, you're an entrepreneur. What does this mean to you as a businessman, this May 11th elections?
It tells me that one has to look very carefully at what is being offered by the two major entities facing the electorate, and to see what plans and what policies they have in place, and to judge them on their plans and policies, judge them on what they have done and what they plan to do and where we want to go. Do we want to deal with a society that has issues of crime and has issues of corruption and has issues of illiteracy? Do we want to deal with a society that has infrastructural problems? How are we going to deal with those problems of corruption? How are we going to deal with those problems of crime? How are we going to deal with those problems of security? And therefore, as somebody who has been involved and has been on the ground for a little while in Guyana, I think it is important that all of Guyana should benefit from whoever or whichever party is elected on May 11th.
What did you think when you first heard that there was going to be a coalition?
My mind flashed back, actually, to the fact that the only time in the history of this here republic that the ruling People's Progressive Party has had to leave office was as a result of a coalition. Back in 1964, it was as a result of the then PNC getting together with the then United Force after the election. The Constitution of Guyana requires that any parties must coalesce before and therefore go on a single slate. So I was really not surprised that the parties, the APNU and the AFC, would coalesce to deal with the People's Progressive Party in the way that they have done.
Looking back, was it 1960?
1964.
1964, and what resulted, did that give you some sort of confidence that there's a possibility that a coalition might win?
Well, put it this way, the ruling party has a particular electorate that it appeals to. The APNU and some of its major constituent parts, that group has a particular type of constituency that it appeals to. The AFC has been able to, shall we say the word pull votes from various constituencies. But the point I like to make all the time is that the ruling party may win the plurality, but it has always been at a disadvantage when other parties decide to coalesce, except for certain times in the history of the political structure in Guyana. Therefore, I think that the PPP is concerned that any large grouping that seems to want to gang up, to use the words loosely, will threaten their hanging on to power, so to speak.
Hanging on.
Yeah. You notice I didn't say hungry.
Yes, I noticed that. Should this happen, and there are many people who believe that there's going to be a transformation, a transition, a change in government. Should this occur, what are two things you would like to be addressed? The last thing you were on the show, you spoke about the issue with licenses, major licenses. Is that one on top of your list?
Yes, clearly, and not just the distribution of media, of radio licenses. I think it is the unfair distribution of not only radio licenses, but the resources of the society. You know, it's quite easy and quite flippant for a former president to get up and say that, you know, we serve all the people of Guyana. But we only serve all the people of Guyana if I like you. And I call you up and I tell you, look, I'm giving away X. Come. It is not a children's party where you have to come early to get a bag. Governance should not be like that. It is not a frivolous affair. It is not a flippant affair. It is a serious matter where the resources of the state ought to be distributed in a fair manner so that all the people of the state can benefit in a meaningful way. And that is one of the things that has to be done. Of course, one of the priorities for me would also be the security of the state, particularly internal security. One of the reasons I continue to cover the narcotics trade is that we have to deal with that as a matter. No sense saying, oh, the Americans, the Europeans, they consume drugs, and therefore we should turn the Nelson's eye with those who are taking it out to sell it to them. when things pass through, some things leave. And nature itself tells you that.
Yes.
Just look at the waters in Guyana.
Yes.
You know, it brings down all the silt and the earth and what have you from the mountains, and it meets and it churns up in front of in the Atlantic outside of Guyana, and it continues to be muddy until it reaches a point where where the blue seas turn to brown, or the brown seas turn to blue. So one has to be concerned that you don't leave that muddied water of drugs.
Why are you so
in the
personally
society.
invested in this, though?
In the drug story?
Yes. Why does it
Because-
concern you so much?
Because I got a call once, not as a result of that, but I'm going to tell you the story and then backtrack a little. Got a call from a judge in Guyana, former judge, who doesn't normally call me. So I returned the call because he left a message. Returned the call and I said, Judge, this is Enrico Woolford returning the call. He said, I just want to compliment you. I said, for what? He then said, for your coverage of the narcotics issues and what have you. And then he said, the reason I also want to compliment you is because I have a son who's a junkie. And he sold almost everything of a house that I had. And it hurts me that I lost my son to this trade. And it's difficult for me at a personal level to deal with the fact that this trade continues unhindered to a point. And I'm happy that you've picked it up. I have known persons who've spent 15 years in jail as a result of making terrible, terrible mistakes doing drugs. I've known persons who have become addicts and who've sold their bodies as a result of dealing with drugs. I have known families that have been devastated because other family members, other friends, in-laws and what have you, have been involved in drugs. I've known people who have been murdered in the streets because of the drug trade. Are we going to allow this to continue? Are we going to allow a society to go down the drain because of filthy lucre? It is a terrible, terrible thing. And anyone who knows anybody who have lost that period or lost someone, it must resonate in your inner soul that it is not a good thing. It is not a good thing for Guyana. It is not a good thing for small societies. It is not a good thing to say, well, look, buildings are going up and we are benefiting from it. There has to be a solution. And if that solution is making the use of drugs for medicinal purposes legal, then so be it. But then it's a controlled substance. You're able to deal with it in a manner that ought to be dealt with, in a manner in which it ought to be dealt with. Then the lure of the big profit margin would no longer be there. But we must deal with it because we will continue to lose persons in this society as a result.
Thank you. In the chat room, Mark Chatterpaul said, Mr. Woolford is one of Guyana's unsung heroes. Mr. Woolford, thank you for being an inspiration and beacon of truth to my generation.
Well, thank you. I don't think that I want to necessarily be just seen as a hero, somebody just... I think I've got a job to do.
Yes.
I think I've been put on the earth to do the job that I'm doing. I like what I'm doing. And I'm very pleased that it is having an impact, particularly on young people. And particularly on people who I think, when I hear comments from young people, I'm very pleased. I mean, I'm very optimistic about Ghana.
Yes.
I think there's hope. I think one day, as I was saying just before I got here to someone at lunch, one day we'll be able to drive on a proper road, all the way past Lethem to Bovista, all the way to Manaus or to various parts of South America. We'll be able to go across bridges. We'll be able to live in a society where malaria and chikungunya and all these other measles and so on will not be things that people should be worried about, where we do not have to grill and to deal with our houses and our children in a manner where persons could just come in and invade our space, where persons could, in a fair manner, appeal to the authorities, in a fair manner be able to get a house lot or be able to acquire frequencies on which to broadcast, in a manner where the society could deal with the handicapped, could deal with the disabled, could deal with people who are different from us in some form or way, or who appear to be different. And where our culture, where our society blooms, that people everywhere should want to say, this is a country that I want to live in and not have to flee.
Enrico, very good note and positive note to end on. But I would be remiss if I don't ask you to just close off with your final thoughts on this heinous crime that just took place, this murder of one of our brethren, Crummy.
It really hurts me, as I said, that here's a young man who just wanted people to know that they need to be part of change. They need to ensure that our society changes, that our society gets better. Here's a very educated young man, very articulate young man, who was gunned down because, for some reason, somebody didn't like what he had done. We could pontificate from now until never every morning as to whether it's political, whether it's not, or what have you. But a life has been lost. And therefore, just words saying we are going to thoroughly investigate this, we are going to leave no stone unturned and so on. We've been turning stones forever in the country with regard to some of the crimes that have been committed. What we've got to get is the stones to actually build and do the work, that we could stand at a position and say, job well done. And I hope in this Crummy Wing case, we will get those stones and do that.
Brother Enrico, once again, thank you for such an informative, inspiring, and enlightening evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
You are quite welcome, sir. And this is Selwyn Collins saying good night. Thank you for tuning in, and fear not what fear whispers to you. Fear your obedience to it.